the beautiful voice. That's right. So I'm really, really happy you were able to make time for us, Alvin. Really exciting. And we have people from a lot of different places here. So we have Lungi from South Africa, we have George from Canada. Mark is in the Netherlands, although it might look like you might be somewhere else, or no, still in the Netherlands, okay. Francesco is dialing in from Italy, and there'll be lots of people watching this later from different locations outside of, regular time zones. Achterhoek, okay, yeah, that is almost that's almost foreign, right?
That's almost Belgium now.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we have Gabrielle from Kenya tuning in as well. Feel free to introduce yourselves to Alvin in the chat and let him know what brought you here. It's always nice for him to know who he's talking to. But yeah, Alvin, so it's so nice to speak to you because I think for a lot of people in the branded change community, we are navigating careers at very different stages. So people were very early on, people are at a later stage of their careers. And I think the brand space is not necessarily an easy one to navigate. There's not a very clear career path necessarily. So all of us are, forging our own paths. Those paths often feel more like jungle gyms than ladders. And so I thought it would be really interesting to get your perspective. You've also had amazing experience like at agencies, in brands, in-house, and now running your own show. So that is also something that not a lot of us can actually reference, like all those different experiences. So I thought we would pick your brain. So I'm happy you agreed to that.
No, it sounds good. I'm happy to do that. And I think happy to be part of this community to talk about my experience, and feel free to shout out if you want something specific in terms of information wise, but yeah, happy to share whatever you want.
So I wanted to start off, you told me in our pre-call that you're kind of a cat with 9 lives. So I was wondering if you can, for those of you people here, if you can give us like a short brief on like those 9 lives.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually born in Malaysia with a Chinese family, and actually in a very young age. And when you're born in Malaysia, I can still imagine myself catching fish in the river, for example. So I've never met a Caucasian or a Western person. So I was actually fully indoctrinated with Chinese Mandarin. So that's the only language I spoke. And at an early stage, my parents decided to migrate to Australia to give the family and the kids a better future, to learn English, to be in a Western context. So fish out of water, plucked and moved to Perth, Western Australia. And that was a bit of a life changer, of course, when you are 14 years old, not really able to speak very well. You're trying to make friends. So it was already maybe a prelude to the ever-changing 9 lives that I was going to have. So in Perth, I also had my education in graphic design, and actually started working there. And actually then I moved to Melbourne in Australia, on the other side of the East Coast. Initially, I wanted to go overseas to New York, but I thought, let's get a bit closer, because the first life was already quite a dramatic change in terms of my environment. I stayed in Melbourne for 5 years, and actually I really enjoyed working there, working for a design company that did a lot of environmental graphics and large branding projects. And then through by chance, I was actually studying my thesis on design, and I was very fascinated with Dutch design, actually. Dutch design is synonymous with, especially in product design and graphic design. And by chance, I got an opportunity to go to The Hague, where I am at the moment. This is now 23 years later on. So we went to The Hague, and I worked at a studio called Studio Dunbar. And that was in our profession anyway, still back in those days, and maybe still nowadays, is quite a renowned agency, let's say. And that was really an eye-opener for me, because it changed the way I looked at life. It changed the way I looked at design. And I've decided to go home and quit my job in Melbourne to come back, because wow, a new world has opened for me. I worked there for a year. And that's where I met Anne, I guess, in that photo. And through that period, I actually was headhunted for a role at Nike, which is a totally unexpected situation, because obviously I was really deep into Dutch design, really embracing it. And yeah, took on the challenge of this role at Nike, which again was a different life, a different type of way of learning. Fantastic opportunity, still, I think, the best marketing company in the world. And then when I reached my peak, and we can dive into it later on, I left. Actually, I left, and I thought to myself, actually, I want to try something different. I want to actually see whether I can actually do advertising, because I think design, advertising, communication, there's always a difference. I didn't see a difference. So I went to TBWA in Paris, never worked in a French context, never worked in advertising, to give it a go. And I think it started to have a thirst of trying something that I'm afraid of, or trying something that is new, to learn something at the end. Sorry, it is taking so long, but and at the
9
end,
lives. I mean, how do you summarize?
absolutely. And I think, was it before or after I came back, I decided to start my own company, and I went to show my portfolio to G-Star, which is a denim brand in the Netherlands. And I did not know it was the Netherlands, and they immediately offered me a job to be the creative director, their first creative director of the brand. Which I said, no, I don't want a job. I just want to freelance for you. I just want to do something for you. And I think a lot of these cases I stumble on it as well. And finally, I started my own business, but then one of my bucket lists happened, which is a job at Samsung in South Korea. And basically, I could not turn down this opportunity. And we moved to South Korea in 2019, in the midst of the pandemic. And 2 years later, I find myself back in the Netherlands. So that's kind of a relatively quick tour.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like you've packed 9 careers into 20 years for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What Mark was asking, what for you was the biggest difference moving from Studio Dunbar to a company like Nike?
Yeah, I think there's a common thread in terms of my change, and it's cultural change, right? Cultural change in terms of not only language, and not only like let's say cultural in terms of Dutch versus American and so forth. That is a big change, and I think most creatives in our field cannot deal with the change, or cannot adapt to the change. And maybe you've heard already from the beginning, I had to change pretty quickly. So survival instinct is very key. Language change is very key. Understanding different cultures. So the big change, to Mark's point about moving from Studio Dunbar, which is very, very Dutch. Of course, it's got an international reputation. It's got a Dutch way of thinking and working that was really respectable. But when you move to Nike, then you need to think globally. You need to think coming up with ideas that are, let's say, transcends different cultures, cultural sensitivity, dealing with different budgets. I think we talked about it before, and about being able to work in a different scale, I guess.
Sorry, I dropped for a second there.
Yeah, I thought it was my side, so I was checking my Wi-Fi.
You were saying that you switched to Nike, you had to think more globally.
That's right. Did I drop off? Did you drop off?
I for sure had
Oh,
a
no
10
worries.
second break there. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so basically the cultural context is different, right? So you're either working from a Dutch client context or a Kenyan context, or actually in my role at Nike, I had to think globally. So we have to come up with ideas that can be universal. And sometimes you look at what Nike does quite well is the headlines are very, very short, very provocative, but universal, and touches on, let's say, current trends and so forth. Whereas perhaps my experience at Studio Dunbar, for example, was much more artistic, if you may, and actually much more focusing on, let's say, how Dutch design would interpret it.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a huge shift. So because I guess you were already good at assimilating or good at adapting to different cultures, that wasn't too big of a leap for you. But could you, like, for those of us who might have aspirations to move to kind of a different context like that, would you have any tips for, like, what are ways that you could make this process a little bit easier for yourself?
Yeah, I would say definitely well, at least an openness to change, right? I think a lot of people are, especially from a creative point of view, there's one way of solving a creative solution. And openness to change and also being receptive to adapt is very important, especially when you're going into different cultures. And cultures not only in terms of language and countries, but cultures, different companies have different cultures. As you know, I had the opportunity to work also on the side of Adidas or Nike, even both sports company in let's say, similar fashion, are totally different cultures. And I think the openness to learn is very important, because and also influencing skills are very, very important, because at the end of the day, we are creatives, but we have to sell our ideas, we have to persuade change. And I think that, from my experience, is not inherent in our design education per se, or creative education. We learn to make beautiful things, but we're not very good at influencing change.
Yeah. So you picked up those influencing skills kind of on the job. Were there people that were mentoring you, or that were, in a way, role modeling for you how that went?
No, I guess I've always thought I was like the black sheep of any context to not fit in, and that is obviously because of my family migrating to different parts of the world. But that became a bit of the strength as well, because you have an outsider's point of view, and I think you naturally try to fix the situation or adapt to the situation, because that's the only way to move forward. So I've applied that in terms of changing jobs as well, of course, making friends, knowing how to influence leadership, how to actually guide the juniors, and so forth. And I think that came naturally, I would say. But I think the starting point is the willingness to do that. Some people are not willing to do that. Some people think this is a top-down way. This is how I work. It should work for everything. I think the openness to learn new ways is something I picked up along the way, I think.
And how would you, so especially, I think, so there's, of course, differences between Dutch culture and American culture, or Chinese culture and American culture. But I think more broadly, like between, let's say, high context and low context kind of cultural environments, right? So you were at Samsung. Korea is probably the polar opposite culture of the Netherlands. How do you navigate transitions like that? So do you stay yourself? Do you completely assimilate?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I'm really interested in a book called, I think, The Cultural Map. I believe you probably know about it as well. It's basically different cultures have different points of interaction and points of communicating with each other. And maybe because I was actually Asian, so I kind of knew going into an Asian context, working in Seoul for Samsung would come with certain ways of working, let's say. So to answer your question, I think you need to be yourself. Of course, you need to know to be your own compass, but you also need to know how things work. So you need to navigate within different cultural contexts. Nike is an American company which is very, let's say, open, very dark. I wouldn't say direct, but definitely, let's say, the shortest distance from A to B, and are risk takers. So in the case with Nike, we would take more risk, and we would actually be more creative in that sense. Whereas Samsung, you have to imagine, like 30 years ago or more, Korea was a third world country, right? So how did they move from third world to first world? Progressively, economically, they have moved very fast, but culturally, they are still quite traditional. They're still catching up. and it's very hierarchical in the organization. And we talked about it briefly in terms of experience in South Korea. It's very hierarchical. So the way how I adapted to it is that if we want to champion creativity, and creativity is the key, but how do you change with the playing style of the context? And in that case, the hierarchy was important. So we just basically have to sell in the work, or have the influence of the work through different channels, let's say. But at the end goal is still the same, to do the best creative work as possible. Whereas Nike, you do it via risk-taking. Whereas in Korea, and maybe also in Samsung, you probably need to work harder on the lobbying skills, or actually selling it upstream. A bit more challenging, I guess, but that's part of the adapting to the different corporate cultures.
I remember when I worked in Korea that I noticed that the hierarchy, there was a benefit to that. So coming from the Netherlands, there was this real idea of like everything needs to be democratic. That's our cultural vibe, and we compromise together. And what I really appreciated in Korea was like one leader sets the tone, like the chaebol kind of approach.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic because everyone follows like lemmings. And it's great if you have a really good leader, and it sucks if you have a bad one, or you don't agree with the direction, right? And so I think what I liked about the way that you were expressing that just now is that I understand correctly, like you see your role as creative director as like championing creativity. And how do you champion creativity upstream in organizations that don't like to take risks? So if I have to sell to someone, you know, at the highest levels of leadership at Samsung, like, well, I have this really risky creative proposal. How do you get people to kind of get an appetite for that risk or that type of creativity?
Yeah, one of my favorite two words is magic and logic, right? So what we do in this profession is to balance logic and magic. Logic could be UX. Logic could be actually solving a problem. Logic is selling more. Logic is actually something that's actually in terms of a very practical point of view. And magic is like, wow, that's so artistic. It's so surprising. It's risk-taking and so forth. So I think the combination of creativity is the balance of both. So without oversimplifying it, I think the same concept could be solved to Nike in a magical point of view, to say, wow, this is so crazy out of the box, and it will sell more, or it works. So you skew the perception, whereas in Samsung, you would definitely dial up the logic. So they're what I call creative engineers. The Koreans as a culture itself is creative engineers based on the hierarchical way of working, super effective, but not out of the box type of people. So the way to win there, to champion creativity, is to sell it in with logic first, to say, well, actually, the consumers are saying this, the engineering details are saying this, you want to push 5G, is really about connectivity, therefore the magic is this. Whereas in Nike, you would say, we're going to do something that's never been done before, and then we're going to roll out to different countries. So I think I think the end goal is still the same, to get the best work out there, but the way of persuasion and influence is also coming from both different angles, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I really naturally believe in that, because it's always like, what's basically also like, what's your brand strategy for getting this proposal to get your foot in the door, right? So I think if you, so looking at your career and all the different steps and all the different roles that you've taken on, I can imagine that I mean, you've experienced all these different perspectives. I can imagine that it can be, you know, intimidating or scary to make a next step. Like, you're clearly also stepping out of your comfort zone to different countries or to different companies, entirely different cultures. Do you have some sort of master plan for your career, or has it just been like opportunities pop up and you jump on them? Do you find it scary to jump on them, or exciting?
That's a good one. If you look at the ones that the let's say the career path I've taken, I've always taken the weakest point of my subject. So it actually started off in my university. I studied graphic design, and I would dare to say I'm not a very good student. So my marks were not very good. And something happened towards the end that during that time, economic situation in Australia was not very good. So graphic designers going out there would be pretty unlikely to get a job. So I was lucky enough to get an honors degree. Don't know how I got it, but they offered me if I want to do one extra year. And I thought to myself, great, because everyone's going to, the good graphic designers are going to get a job. If I went out there to compete with them, I'm going to not get a job. So I did this honors course, and I end up choosing my weakest subject, which is typography. So that was a bit of a game changer, because obviously you would choose your strongest subject, but I chose a weak subject thinking at the end of this 1 year, the government's paying for it. At least I can be better off doing something different. And that was a revelation for me, because I think I learned, it became the subject I love the most. So all the jobs I've taken have always been super scary, because I know nothing about them. I know nothing about football. Nike football. I became the global creative director for Nike football. And at the end of in the beginning, it was like, okay, soccer. No, not soccer, football. Okay, football. And this is Cristiano Ronaldo, and he plays this way, and this is this. This is how the game works. This is an offside. So imagine zero. And then at the end, I was the go-to guy before anyone goes to any shoots to say, how should we shoot this? And what is the authentic style of this, the FC Barcelona? So the idea of learning while I'm working fascinated me. I did not know anything about jeans. So I'm the global creative director for G-Star. So the idea of actually starting something, giving them something that can help their company and learning from it was fascinating. And when I went to South Korea, I never owned an Android phone. I have no idea how to turn it on. So I bought a phone immediately before I went to South Korea, and just tried to, whoa, I don't even know how to turn on the phone. So at the end of the day, when I was there, I was responsible globally for all the phone launches, right? So the Z Flip, the Fold. So I need to know my stuff to be able to do it. But it's also scary, but exciting. But I guess the motivation for me is that I have a thirst for learning, and I think being confident on yourself to say, I've got something to give, I can be an added value. And in return, I can get the richness of learning from something that I don't know anything about.
So this touches upon something that I always find fascinating, because I think if you're a good brand person, you can work in different sectors. Not always, like for instance, personally, I'm not the person to hire for fast moving consumables or apparel or that area. I know nothing about it. I wouldn't be able to sell a pair of jeans for my life. But you apparently got hired in these quite different sectors, even though I guess like G-Star and Nike are somewhat closely related. So there must be something that your clients recognize, either in results or work or approach, that is a strength for them, that is something that they want to bring into their company, regardless of the product or the sector. What do you think that is for them?
I forgot to mention before, you just reminded me, the connecting point is they're all brands. And I think I'm fascinated about brands. That's why I'm really excited to be invited to this thing. Branding is basically the core of everything. And I think leading to your question, which is like, why would brands, why would different companies choose me or ask me, invite me to join them, is that the proof of the work that I've done for different brands, regardless of their industries, is let's say, a proven track record of success. Let's say it doesn't really matter if I didn't understand it. I've somehow moved the needle or improved the design, and actually understood the core of the brand. So my fascination and interest is unleashing brand potential, let's say. So regardless of the different industry, and then that takes a lot of interest and openness to learn about a brand and to be able to fix it from inside out. And I think hopefully the future companies that want to hire me can see that it's not just a cookie cutter approach to add creativity on top of your brand, but it's actually, yeah, that's my brand and he made it better, right? So regardless of the industry, and I think that gives me confidence as well, because I think my recipe is definitely coming from a brand point of view, and the result is something that feels fitting to anything I touch.
Mm. So what is when you come into a new brand, what's your first 90 days? What do those days look like? How do you spend them trying to find your way around and trying to create like I'm assuming you create a really clear battle plan for yourself.
Yes and no. I think people. I think the first thing is who's who. I'm normally, depending on the role, using South Korea as the total opposite example, is like, who am I dealing with here? Who's my team? You know, one-on-one, spending a lot of time. I invest a lot of energy in people, in both up and down, of course. I talk to everyone and I learn a bit of dynamics. I think it's very important to understand the dynamics of a company, of the people, of the individual. Starting, especially when I was actually inheriting a team, is to know the team, the people, who you're dealing with, the strength and the weaknesses, and how would they work together. Maybe they don't work together very well, and quickly establishing the gaps and the opportunities. That is most important, because we need each other to create work, let's say. And then, of course, simultaneously or after that, I need to know the dynamics of the company that I'm working with in terms of the general goals, and being a very much a people person and quite sensitive in that as well, is to establish the roadblocks, what channels you need to go up, who should I influence to get the work done, and what level of risk are they willing to take. Is it a logic-based company? Is it a magic-based company? Who's calling the shots? Who's on the boardroom? All the way to the top. Because like I said, if the goal is to improve the brand and to champion creativity, my job is to guide my team to do the best work. And my job is to sell up to gain trust of the organization. And if it's actually an agency per se, I need to sell it to the clients, right? So for me, intel is key to know what I'm dealing with, because I think creativity, I've been doing this now for 30 years. I wouldn't say it's a given, but that you can control. But the environment you work in and the playing style, you can't control that much.
So that's interesting, because I think for a lot of people, creativity feels like, ooh, that's the most vulnerable. Like that's the thing that kind of is hardest to grasp, but clearly you are very comfortable with it. I wonder, over the past almost 30 years that you've been working, how do you make sure that creativity keeps flowing? Like, how do you stay inspired? How do you stay ahead of things? Because brand is obviously about staying ahead of the game, and it's not easy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think today I was just been talking about AI generated content. You know, nowadays things are going so fast technology wise, but for me, it's always starting with the brand as well. It's like what kind of leading to actually referring to the question you asked before, is what do you do in the first 90 days, is also understanding where the brand is at the moment, at that time, and what sort of choices, or how do you push the boundaries in terms of the borders as well. But at the same time, you need to know what trends are out there in terms of digital technologies, or actually consumer technologies, or consumer trends and so forth. So I'm constantly on blogs and sites looking at all these things, even if I'm not myself practicing on Mid-Journey creating content, but I'm always very impressed. But I need to know the context of how things are being used and how it's being expressed. And for me, besides understanding it myself, I think working with the younger generation is very helpful, because they're nowadays, as you hear, every brand is focusing on Gen Z, Gen X, millennials, and they're much more tech savvy. And I think if you're focusing on consumer insights in terms of what consumer wants, and pair it with communication trends, For us, I think for me, definitely it is about keeping up with the trends and understanding the capabilities, but it also needs to be appropriate and relevant for the brand you're working for, because it's not just doing stuff for the sake of doing it, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite sayings also is like your strategy is showing. Like you can sometimes tell, like someone from the research department has put a brief on your, like, this is what, you know, Gen Z wants.
Yeah.
Go and make it. And then it's like, oh, no one's gonna, like, this is not gonna go down very well.
Well, I read something somewhere which is quite interesting. Is like, you cannot just say Gen Z, the group of people that were from this age to this age, they will behave this way. This is a bit of a generalization, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, inherently, I think they will be much more exposed to different technologies and different ways of communicating on TikTok or Insta stories or whatever. But it's more about understanding the medium that reaches them. But because at the end of the day, it's about people, right? It's about how do you get people excited to buy a pair of jeans? What are the triggers for that? You know, how do you put how do you sell a phone, which is basically glass and steel, and make it so exciting and everything's so possible with this phone? How do you sell a Nike shoe that sells the possibility of achieving your goals? Because it's all about human insights, right? But I think the technologies and the trends, etc., are the means to be surprising, but also the means to connect to the people that you want to reach.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, ooh, I'm not sure if I can keep up with this pace? Like you were.
Yeah, every day you're reminded by it. And I think well, I'm not exactly young anymore, but if you think about like people that go out there and freelance and you know and have lots of skills in the bags, you know, they can do, especially AI, I think it is so impressive and fast. And back in those days, we were, you know, like already pretty good working on Illustrator, Photoshop, and hey, we can, you know, get things done quite nicely. And I think that level of discomfort, I guess, in terms of how trends are moving is also exciting for the future, I would guess. And I still feel like with my maturity and experience in branding, that has its place as well, if you know what I mean. So for my career path at the moment, it's basically finding those people, those young people, the people that I work with, that will actually do that work. But I feel that my knowledge of the brand can enable that and help them, teach them in that sense. So I in one hand, I'm thinking, oh, I can't keep up. On the other hand, I'm thinking it's so fascinating where it's going, but I still have a place to contribute, I guess.
Yeah. I know that you're also the president of the AGI, which is Allianz Graphique Internationale.
That's correct.
The International Alliance of Graphic Designers. And I think we spoke about this in the pre-call as well, but I think what's interesting about that group, so this, for those of you who are not in the know, so this is a group of like internationally very acclaimed designers, like Steven Sagmeister and people like Gert Dunbar. But I think AGI overall is kind of on a quest of reinvention potentially for this new age, as well as some of the members. Can you talk a little bit about how you're trying to make AGI or keep AGI relevant, bring in new blood?
Yeah, well, sure. That's a bit of a hard one, actually. I think just in summary, well, a very, very short introduction is that AGI has been founded in 1952, I believe. And basically, French and Swiss graphic designers decided to create some sort of club, that a social club that people come together and swap ideas and actually have a drink or two. So it's quite a social event, and slowly or surely it is now, I think, more than 600 members globally, and it's actually invites only, that they feel that you need to, let's say, submit your your credentials, and you need to be passing through a test to get through this. And when you're in there for life, right? So it sounds very prestigious, and it sounds like some sort of secret club, which in a way sometimes it is. But to come back to Anne's point, as well as to get into this organization, you need to show your accomplishment. And normally you are probably at the later stage of your career, because you've achieved a lot, you've won awards, you've actually was involved in education, you will also have some highlights in your career. So what does it mean? It means that the club is filled with older people, people that have already reached it, and basically we gather once a year somewhere in all 3 continents. The next one is going to be in New Zealand, that we come together, and it's partly a social event, but it's also a point in time that you exchange ideas. And for me, I don't know how I got to be a president, by the way, long story, but now looking at it from the outside, especially with the amount of change and understanding of trends as well, is that it feels like this organization, because of its setup, is a bit out of touch, let's put it this way. And it makes sense if I explain to you already that you need to be the end of the career to achieve a lot to join this organization. And then basically this club is highly prestigious, and also has all great designers from all around the world. But maybe the organization needs to evolve to introduce new blood, change the rules of candidacy, let's say, to make sure that we refresh ourselves and be more current. And I think at least my ambition for the Dutch group is to inject some sort of format that people are having more dialogue. We are trying to also incorporate younger designers into the equation. We're trying to get more female or more women, gender balance into the organization, to try to bring also some sessions of external parties to inject new workshops or inspiration for them to be much more open in terms of what the design profession is nowadays, because it's changing so rapidly. And I think it's a slow ship to turn, but yeah, I think about that every day in terms of how it can be improved.
Yeah, I think what makes that story, interestingly, what makes the story quite relevant to us is that I think one of the things that we definitely rage against is the old boys club, right? So we really believe that, like, different ages and different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, religions, like professions, like it's the diversity that makes it work, and it's a diversity that I think brings so much richness in communities. And I was curious if you have any tips for, let's say, young designers outside of the West, or young creatives out of the West, who also want to have, a global career, who have aspirations to grow beyond their countries, because we can pretend that it's a global economy, but it's not.
Yeah,
we're not there yet, right? And I think it's going to be harder for a Korean, maybe that's not the case today, but a few years ago it would have been harder for a Korean designer to make the leap to the West than the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think that's still the case for many countries in the global South.
Yeah, I think that is a very golden tip, and I've been trying to persuade my niece, who's also a graphic designer, to leave your comfort zone. If you really have an ambition to learn and to actually be a global creative, let's say, leave your comfort zone, leave your town, leave that small town to the next town. I would say I did my choices in my life came from not my own. Let's say my family moved from Malaysia to Australia. I hated it, of course. When you're like 14, you have your friends and you get plugged out and you go to another location. It's like, oh my God, this is terrible again. I have to learn a new language. I have to make friends. I don't even know what to order in the canteen. I remember the first day I went to the canteen and the food looks different, So, but that discomfort creates change, and change creates also learning, right? So my advice would be is to when you can get out of your comfort zone and learn something different and learn a new culture, especially going to another country. I mean, I did not learn Korean, but being in Korea, I learned the cultural context. I think most people believe that designing it from afar, we're global, we speak English, but that's not the case, right? So every culture is slightly different. And I would definitely encourage younger creatives to even internship to go overseas to do something different, and you can see a different perspective, because the way I think we can actually achieve more peace in the world, or actually more collaboration in the world, is to understanding different point of views. And the only way to do that is actually to be in someone else's shoes, right? So to actually be in another context, to really feel what it's like to live in America, in Europe, in Africa, and in that way we can think differently and maybe have many solutions to tap on when we are solving problems, I think.
Yeah, I always, when people say like, oh, you know, we need to travel more, I was like, no, don't just like, travel gets you like just a little bit, but go to another country and work for a boss and a team in that country. Be the only Dutch person,
Yes.
be the only Kenyan, be the only Chinese, be the only.
Yeah.
Then you'll learn what it's like, because I think also with the digital nomadism, what you see is that people think, oh, I've worked in Bali. Like, no, you've opened your laptop in Bali. You've not worked in Bali. So I guess, you know, internships is how I met you. So
Yeah, it's great.
internships are key. I want to make sure that I also open the floor if Kaviki or Gabu, Francesco, Mark, Alex, if you have questions, feel free to, you're welcome to just turn on your mic and jump in as well. In the meantime, oh, hey, Alex. Go ahead. And
I ask question.
Alex, hello.
How's it, my man? Can you hear me?
I can hear you well, thank you.
Apologies for joining so delayed.
Yes, I was looking at my watch and I was not sure what time you were going to show up.
You man with big humor. Me like. Apologies extended. You big chief, in my opinion. Please accept gift of invitation whenever you come to Berlin, Brazil, South Africa, Georgia. Please contact me first. My people will take good care of you.
Oh, I will. Thank you. Much appreciated.
And also, you have earned right to get free song digitally, online or offline, free solo concert from me and my people, anytime, anywhere. Because like Dato Zinzadze said 3 days ago, when we did Short Walk of Freedom to honor Chiefest Champion of all chiefs, who would have turned 105 years ago. 105 years ago was born and would have turned 105 3 days ago. Like he said, what will be on his gravestone after I tell him what will be on my father's gravestone? He say, Alex, I know what will be on mine. Let's sing together. You start.
Oh, are we asking Alvin to sing? What will be on his gravestone?
Oh, is that the question?
Is that the question? Talking about a question to take you out of your comfort zone.
Well, actually, I don't think about a song, but I do know a song, but it's actually from Keen. I don't know whether you know the band. I'm not going to sing it, but it's like everything is changing, but the whole world's changing, but I still feel the same. I can't remember, but basically there is a notion about, which is, I'm bringing it back to the context of this this presentation. It is that I think the world is changing, but I think we kind of still have to find our own place. I think if I was going to do a song in my tombstone, it would definitely be about adapting to the changing world or something like that, I would say.
Cool. Love that. Anyone else who wants to jump in? If we don't have any questions, I'm going to jump in with my own very specific question. So one of the things that we spoke about in our pre-call, which is quite specific, but I think is relevant to some of us here, is if you're in the social impact space, within brand, everyone thinks that your work is overhead. So like, oh yeah, brand and marketing, that's the stuff that you do, to get the word out. It's not central, it's not core to the work. So we have to do a lot of evangelizing of our profession. I don't know if you ever are in that position, in the type of companies that you work for, but what do you find are the most kind of compelling reasons for leaders in different types of organizations to invest in brand?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think going back to different cultures, and cultures also means a deep understanding and value of what we do. So the beautiful thing about being in the Netherlands is design and creativity is championed as well, right? So I think Gerrit Dombar or some graphic designers get knighted. Oh my God, is that impossible in certain countries? Whereas in Australia, what is graphic design? What do you do actually? Why would I have to pay money? On other scale of things is seen to be a high form of intelligence, a high form of profession. So different countries have different, let's say, appreciation in terms of what we do, especially with branding. And also nowadays, the terms are so loosely used. I do branding, I do marketing, I do whatever it is. And especially with AI nowadays, everyone's a creative, right? So just to come back to that equation, we had to evangelize that when we went to South Korea, because South Korea was really engineering first company. Everything is really based on logic. This is a phone, sell it. No, of course. Why does Apple do it much better than us? Seriously, we have this conversation all the time. So there's a lot of evangelizing, a lot of education needed to sell the story of what we do is valuable to you. And a lot of it is to do with understanding the consumers, understanding the brand DNA to be able to unleash it. So I think for sure, I think one of my main tasks when I was in Samsung is to really preach the value of branding. And giving you an example, Samsung, they were really looking to Apple a lot of the times. Every time we start a project, we have a complete benchmark research to the millimeter of Apple, why and what UX experience and so forth, and why. So I keep reminding them, actually, you are yourself. So you need to find your own DNA. You need to express it in your own way. But of course, looking at another culture, they do it because they're from California. They have a tree in their store is because they're nature orientated. The marble floor in the store is actually because Steve Jobs went on holidays in Florence and was inspired by that. You can't just do that. You have your own story. So a lot of what I do is to kind of find the hidden treasures within the brand, and the gap to educate them that if we do branding properly, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a social space or a corporate brand, the sincerity and the honesty of the brand can really help sell products, save people, can really open doors. So it is regardless of the type of branding, but I think the answer is within the brand. So the way I sell it is like, I'm not putting something on top of it. I'm not just telling you that adding marketing on top of it, you're going to be greater, bigger, because that's very short term. Branding is long term. And I think the way I sell it in is definitely from a logical point of view, that this is you. We're just trying to improve you. And if you improve yourself well, you're going to be a better brand, sell more products, be much more valued, and people are going to listen to you, and we're going to get things done. So that's kind of my approach, but different people have different maturity levels of understanding that, of course.
Yeah. And I think this is really also a question of human nature, because I wonder, so I think Korea it's almost there, but I feel like there's maybe in certain cultural aspects, it's very good at being itself, like movies, music. But like if we think of them like in the technology space, definitely as like very fast followers, extremely fast followers. And that comes from that engineering and the analytical side, right? So I remember having a conversation with my boss, and he asked me, how do you do competitive analysis in the Netherlands? And I joked and said, like, well, we use spyglass. And the next day, there was a little box on my desk, a red box, and I opened it, and there was a pair of glasses with a little camera hidden in the bridge of the glasses. And he's like, well, we have a new assignment for a coffee chain. You know, they want to be like Starbucks. So you go out and you do your research. And I was like, serious? So like all my colleagues that day, like everyone went out with their spyglasses into like all these different coffee chains and different, and like analyzing, like you said, like analyzing the menus, the little displays of muffins, like,
Yeah.
and what I found really difficult, and I find that also in Kenya, and I find that in Saudi Arabia and other places I've worked, is that can someone who comes from this is the other way around, like we have to work from ourselves, and we have to think about what do we believe, and we have to create from that basis. Can the person who's analytical ever make that leap, the person who's creative, and vice versa? Because I'm not saying creativity is always the answer. Or are these two different types of people that just need to learn how to get along, and if they work together, they might be able to get it done?
Well, I see. Actually, I didn't see the separation actually. So a lot of what I do, I see myself. I could be a strategist as well, right? So whatever we do needs a form of strategy, I guess. But yeah, strategy and creativity is symbiotic to me, I think, and I think it is not a direct answer to what you're saying, but I think it's always not invented here syndrome. That's one, and also someone else does it better than us, right? So you just mentioned, we want to open a coffee brand. Let's look at Starbucks. It's very logical. They must have done it really well, so we just copy that. Or we want to start a sports brand. Let's copy Nike. And I think what they don't understand is that there's a reason why when a brand is successful, they're very much unleashing what is inherent in their DNA to be successful. So the quick fix is to say, if Nike does that, we'll do this. But it's not really a long-term plan. And I think it comes with confidence. If you are not very confident, and I can imagine if you're a startup, you're not that confident. And most of the time, it's also to do with the founders. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, FunMove went bankrupt. I don't know whether you know that. I think the e-bike industry was created. So most startups are founded by tech people, or actually by product designers and so forth. They're not particularly savvy in terms of growing brands. And I think what is super key, especially as a startup and also a scale up, is to be able to understand that there's a certain time that you need to hand it over to experts to help you become yourself. And I think maybe I'm going around in a circle, but basically I think it's very key to stay who you are as a brand. And nowadays, my absolute weapon to use is, if we are targeting Gen Zs and millennials, they care about authenticity. They care about realness. They can smell it from a mile away because they're so visually or conceptually savvy. If you're not true to yourself, you're going to fail. So that's my angle, which is true. So a brand can greenwash. A brand can actually say what they're not. A brand can pretend they're someone else. But at the end of the day, it's not going to work commercially either. So it has every added benefit to find out who you are and improve who you are. And that's branding, I think.
We have one last question from Wanjiru on chat. What does your ideal team look like in terms of numbers, skills, expertise, mindsets?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I'm now sitting in office with nobody here. So yeah, I don't know, actually. When I was in South Korea, I built a team of 12 within 2 months, and it was too fast, but we were needing to create a team to fulfill the work. So that's probably not a good example. I would say, for me, I'm sort of very interested in omni-channel diversity. So and the model I have at the moment, there's no full-time staff here. So we work only with freelancers because I think the skill change needs to be adapted to different people. So for me, the ideal team would be people with totally different skills that are not the same, that can push the boundaries, challenge the status quo. And the way I work, I always say that I'm like a chef. So basically I decide dish, and then I assign different people tasks to come up with their own interpretation of my dish. And that will mean that the team is very diverse in its background. So that's how I like to work. But in terms of a set number of the setup, I don't have a clear plan, but definitely not big.
Cool. Thanks so much, Alvin, for sharing all of your different insights. I can imagine that for some of our younger members, it's going to be really inspirational in terms of, like, where your career within the brand space could lead you. And I think for the rest of us, I won't call us old, but for the rest of us, what kind of things lay ahead? I guess that would be my final question, kind of to wrap it up with you. What are experiences that you haven't tried yet that you would love to do? We can do some manifestation here with all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I have a bucket list, let's say, in terms of it is more changing industries per se. And this one might sound very superficial, but I've done, let's say, like a large sports brand. I've done denim brand. I've done car brands. I've done phone tech. It could possibly be in the social sector. I think it scares the hell out of me, to be honest with you. I've always done things with a real clear purpose of pushing sales or commercial success, let's say. But definitely, if you follow the trend of my thought, is more about learning something that I don't know anything about and scares me a little bit. I've actually recently considered thinking United Nations or something. I have no idea in terms of that field, but I think if my skill can actually make change for the better, and it's comfortable for me to be able to be contributing to it, I think that'd be great. And I think it has to be logical, of course. And that's one end. On the other end is totally different. Is actually the luxury sector, which is totally the opposite. We're now in conversations with LVMH. So total luxury, and not because of from a monetary point of view, but it is very specifically difficult consumer types. So I'm very interested in that challenge. And on the other hand, it is about sort of making the world a better place, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting, two different paths. I'm very curious where you'll go. Keep us up to date. We're recruiting you to our team nonetheless.
Okay.
So even if that means that at LVM, you are going to be recruiting interns from Kenya, then that's your way to make a difference in careers.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks so much, Alvin.
You're very welcome.
Throwing you a bouquet of flowers.
Yes. And thank you everyone for listening in. And yeah, if you have any more questions, you can send it to me via Anne.
Cool. I'll make sure that we share some of the outtakes with everyone and get your agreement on that, Alvin. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks for the invitation, Anne. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.